Hi everyone, I'm here today at the Australian Army Museum in Puckapunyal, Victoria, about 120 kilometres north of Melbourne. This collection has undergone redevelopment recently to enable it to preserve and exhibit the history of the Royal Australian Armoured Corps and the Royal Australian Artillery, and it reopened to the public as of March 2026. We're here looking at one of the few surviving examples of Australia's first locally designed and built tank, the Australian cruiser AC1 or the Sentinel. It's an interesting example of armour development during the early period of the war, and while it never saw combat, it became an important study in how to move quickly from concept into production by adapting available materials and production methods to new applications. Now, at the outset of World War II, Australia had a limited capability for heavy engineering and armaments production. In terms of armaments, only light firearms were being made locally. While there were train, engine and rail rolling stock workshops, the local automotive industry consisted mainly of assembling vehicles from imported kits or importing fully built-up cars. Now, as I discussed in another video about the Australian-produced 25-pounder gun howitzer, it was going to take a massive effort if local production of anything other than small arms was going to happen in a country that had, for the most of its history, functioned as the breadbasket and ore mine of the British Empire. So at the outbreak of World War II, much of the British Commonwealth declared war on Germany alongside Britain. The United States and its incredible capacity for industrial production would not be available to assist with this effort until the Lend-Lease Act was passed some 18 months later. Britain herself had to focus on production of aircraft and ships to remain alive, and so there was a large push for other countries in the Commonwealth to become capable of supplying themselves and Britain with war materials. The Ram and Grizzly tanks developed by Canada, based on US designs, are examples of this. And in Australia, production of localised versions of the British Universal or Bren gun carrier were ramped up in 1941, and almost 5,000 of these were produced. When it came to tanks, the Australian Army General Staff laid down specifications for a locally designed and built cruiser tank in December 1940. Development of that tank was made a priority in January 1941, and the first pilot was produced only 11 months later. So the specifications laid down were for that of a cruiser tank, which in terms of British tank doctrine means a tank with good mobility and fitted with an armament that enables it to engage other tanks. Priority was given to achieving a high top speed and fitting it with a British anti-tank gun. It was designed to be capable of mounting either the QF 2-pounder or QF 6-pounder main gun, as these were being used at the time on British cruiser tanks like the Crusader. Only the 2-pounder or 40mm anti-tank gun was on hand when production of this tank, the AC1, kicked off in June 1942. By mid-1943, about 65 had been made, and a further prototype called the AC3, which was fitted with a 25-pounder gun howitzer, had also been manufactured. Now, production was overseen by Sydney's Chilora tank assembly shops, and these had been set up by the New South Wales Railway Company, who were experienced in making train engines and rail cars. At that point, production of the AC1 was halted, as by mid-1943, Australia received over 400 retired British Matilda II tanks that were being fitted out to provide infantry support in the jungles of the South Pacific. Australia had also received over 300 M3 Stuart light tanks and 750 M3 medium tanks like Lee's and Grant's from the US, so there was no shortage of tanks for training and for equipping Australia's newly formed armoured units. So this is an interesting tank for a few reasons. The hull and the turret, as you can see here, were produced as single large castings that were opened at the front. In the case of the hull, the opening was closed off with a bolt-on front transmission cover. Similarly, the front of the turret was closed off by using a bolt-on main gun manlet. There's also a large engine cover plate bolted onto the top of the hull to close off this opening in the casting. So the chassis concept used on the AC1 is very similar in design to the US M3 medium, and you can see an overview of it here. So there's a front drive sprocket for the tracks, rear idle wheels, and 3 sets of double-wheeled bogies. The bogies each use a horizontal volute spring to control the pivoting of the 2 road wheels. The power packs initially considered were the Wasp petrol and Gubison diesel radial engines, but due to limited availability of these US engines, designers had to settle for using 3 5.7-litre Cadillac petrol V8s to get the desired power output. The V8s were mounted in the rear of the hull, 2 side by side and 1 further to the rear, all feeding into the front-mounted transmission via gears and shafts running under the turret. So this tank's another example of using multiple car or truck engines in tanks that can be seen in the Sherman M4A2 and M4A4 that used multiple GM and Chrysler engines. So these Cadillac V8s, the 3 of them, produced 246 kilowatts in total and could move the 28-ton tank along at a top speed of 48 kilometers per hour. Frontal armour on the tank was 65mm and there was a crew of 5. So here you can see the main armament, the QF 2-pounder or 40mm anti-tank gun, along with the secondary armaments, which were 2 water-cooled Vickers 303 medium machine guns. These machine guns had been made locally in Australia since 1929, and so the unique penile shapes you see on the mantlet and on the front of the tank here were designed to house the water jacket of that 303 Vickers, and that's why they're such a unique, unusual, and often commented upon shape. So the tank never saw combat and it never moved beyond testing and trials, but it was famously used to represent German tanks in the World War II movie The Rates of Tobruk. Plans were made to fit a later variant, the AC4, with a 17-pounder anti-tank gun, but production of the tank was halted before this was implemented. So that's all I want to say about the AC1 Sentinel here at the Australian Army Museum Puckapunyal. Thanks for getting to the end of the video and listening to me bang on about this tank. I look forward to talking to you soon about another armoured vehicle, and until then, I hope you stay well. Thank you.